Hello, hello, and welcome back to yet another college football video. Today, my football playoff rankings, they are official. The matchups, I'm going to give my predictions, and I'm just going to talk about who I think got left out. And I will say this, I don't like the current format. I'll get into that a little bit later. But given the current format, I think the correct 12 teams got in. I'll say that, which is a very good sign. Let's get right into it. Though. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Don't got a Google Slides today, so hopefully this video won't be an hour long. But let's take a look at it here. Okay, so I'm trying to think how I go through this. Okay, well let's just talk about this. I have my college football playoff rod poll coming out after this video, so I'm going to try not to get too deep into the conference championship games themselves because I'm going to talk about it later on. Hint at what happened. So let's start. The number one seed gets a first round bye is the Big Ten champions, Oregon. They beat Penn State. They're undefeated and deservingly so. They've been the number one seed like ever since they beat Ohio State, I think. So the country, and they get the first round bye in this spot right here. The number two seed is the SEC champion, Georgia. They go 11-2. They beat Texas again, and they get a first round bye. They are in this slot right here. They'll play in the Sugar Bowl, I should add. Oregon will play in the Rose Bowl. That's interesting. Number three seed, interesting. Boise State. They were actually the third highest rated conference champion, if you could believe it, over the Big 12 and the ACC, which is shocking, really. But that is what it is. Boise State, obviously, has had an amazing season. They played a very close game with Oregon, which, by the way, has helped them so much because if they would have not played Oregon, or if they would have lost to some other random team in week two or whatever it was, people would not look at them nearly as good because and it's good the time they played them because Oregon was so weak those first couple weeks of the season. I think the current Oregon team would stomp Boise State by 30 points. But since Boise State caught them at the right time and played them so close, that makes Boise State's season look so much better than it is, in my opinion. However, they did play a very good game against UNLV in the Mountain West Championship game. They are 12-1, and they get that first round bye. And listen, I'm going to talk about a lot of this path right here. Semifinals is ridiculously easy. This path right here. I'm going to talk about that in depth later on. Number four seed, the Big 12 champion, Arizona State. Let me clarify here. Boise State will be playing in the Fiesta Bowl. Arizona State will be playing in the Peach Bowl. They beat Iowa State. Arizona State is now 11-2. They are red hot. They have finished the season absolutely on fire, beaten a lot of teams, including BYU, Iowa State now. Arizona State has passed the test. They have met all challengers and they have come out on top. Very interesting. So those are the four highest rated conference champions, and they will all get a bye. I don't like the automatic bye system. I like it for a 12-team playoff. I don't like that it automatically goes to the conference champions. I would prefer it goes to the four highest rated teams, regardless of whether or not they won their conference championship. That's my opinion. You can disagree with it. I understand the idea of giving the conference champions a bye because they need more time to rest because if you didn't play in a conference championship game and a team did play in a conference championship game and won it, they would have played a week more recently than you. Does that make sense? So I understand it, and maybe I'm indifferent to it, I should say, but I don't like the idea that teams like Tennessee, Ohio State, Notre Dame got to play round one, and Boise State gets a bye for winning the Mountain West Championship. I don't love that, but I guess I can just be indifferent to that point right there. The fifth highest ranked conference champion was Clemson. So they get an automatic bid, which, I guess I really don't like that fifth spot, that automatic fifth spot, because Clemson was not a top 12 team in the country. They lost three games in the regular season. They lost two times at home, but credit where credit is due. In their biggest game of the season against SMU, they showed up and they won the ACC championship game. So I guess you could say they earned themselves a spot, even though they lost their last regular season game to South Carolina. But Clemson is in that 12 spot over some other teams. Listen, I really like. Okay, maybe do I talk about it right now? Okay, so Clemson beat SMU. However, they had SMU ranked above Clemson, which I like. I like that a lot because Clemson lost twice at home. They lost to teams who did not have 10 wins. They lost twice to teams who had less than 10 wins. SMU was undefeated at home. Their only losses came to Clemson and to BYU. Clemson, and if you look at that game, I'll talk about that game more in depth in the next Rod poll that comes out. But honestly, Clemson got off to a ridiculously good start. SMU made major mistakes with turnovers and stuff early on. I think Clemson took a 21-0 lead in the first quarter. They blew the lead. They SMU climbed back from a 17-point lead in the fourth quarter, tied the game, but Clemson drove down, made a 56-yard field goal as time expired. It was a great win for Clemson. I'm not denying that. However, I think SMU wins that game 7 out of 10 times. That's just my opinion. There's no way to prove that, but I'm glad that the committee put SMU above Clemson because I think they had a better season and I think they are a better team. So that means the final two spots are Clemson and SMU and the teams that got left out. Do I go ahead and talk about them now? Yeah, I will. The teams that got left out. We have, click on the rankings here. Alabama, I think, is the first team out. Miami, Ole Miss, South Carolina. Those are really the teams that were being talked about. And if SMU won the ACC championship, Alabama probably would have got in. No, it certainly means Alabama would have got in. I am very happy that that was not the case. I don't think a three-loss team belongs in the playoff. That's just my opinion. That's why I don't. Honestly, I would prefer that, just to be honest with you. I think that would have been much more exciting. I wish Miami would have made the ACC championship game over Clemson, and I wish they would have beat SMU. That would have been my dream scenario here, but that did not happen. I got to accept reality. But this is the thing about the Alabama. Listen, it's a very interesting argument. Let's talk about Alabama first of all. So Alabama was sitting right there, and a lot of Alabama fans thought it was a surefire thing that regardless of who won the ACC championship game, they would get in over the loser. They were very confident, and I'm glad that they got that smirk wiped off their face because you cannot, I repeat, you cannot lose to two 6-6 teams and make the playoffs. You can't do it. You can't do it. Even if that was their only two losses and they beat Tennessee on the road, I would feel shaky about it. But you're telling me you lose your and then you lose two games to 6-6 opponents. And Alabama fans have the nerve to talk about, well, look at our wins, look at our wins. Who cares? Beat 6-6 teams and you'd be in the playoffs right now. That is the end of the argument. I don't care what Alabama fans have to say about strength of schedule. Look at who we beat. Look at who you lost to. If you can't take care of business, you're not a playoff team. That is the criteria for me. SMU, say what you want. They lost to BYU, they lost to Clemson. Who else beat them? They didn't have an upset game. Nobody who they were heavy favorites over beat them. Alabama cannot say the same. Alabama got dog walked in November by the worst Oklahoma team in years. That does not go unnoticed. Alabama lost to Vanderbilt. Their defense gave up 40 plus. That cannot be ignored, and it won't be ignored. And I'm glad the committee did not let their major Alabama bias shine through in this example. Alabama did not deserve to make the playoffs. It's honestly a joke. After they lost to Oklahoma, they should have been out of contention. But the committee placed them right in that spot where, if something happens, maybe we can put them in. No, that did not happen. Cooler heads prevailed, and thankfully Alabama is where they belong, playing Michigan in some irrelevant bowl game. That warms my heart, truly. And I really am not an Alabama hater, but Alabama fans and the people that glaze Alabama relentlessly are just exhausting. They really are, because this is the worst Alabama season in who knows how long, probably at least a decade. And you think they should make the playoffs because they beat Georgia barely at home? I'm sorry, man. Have fun in the Alamo Bowl against fucking Michigan. Have fun in the Toyota Tire, the Michelin Man Bowl. All right. That's Alabama. Let's get to Miami. This one, like I said, this one really does hurt. I don't really think they deserve to make the playoffs after their loss to Syracuse. Their Georgia Tech loss, I'll say this, their Georgia Tech loss aged really good, okay, because of how they looked against Georgia. And I believe that was on the road, by the way, when Miami played Georgia Tech. Yeah, that was on the road. So that loss aged well. I think it's very well understood that all they had to do was take care of business against Syracuse. They'd be in the ACC championship game, and then win or loss, they'd be in the playoffs. So I can't really say anything about Miami. They controlled their own destiny and they fumbled it. They lost. So I really can't be too upset that they didn't make it. I just wanted them to make it because it would have been absolute electric instant classic for whoever they played against. It would have been an amazing game, but they fumbled it, they controlled their destiny, and they lost. So I'm not too upset about that. Ole Miss, honestly, I think Ole Miss had a much better reason. Like, try and explain to me why was Alabama ahead of Ole Miss? They both had the common opponent against Georgia, right? Alabama barely beat Georgia. Ole Miss dominated Georgia. Alabama lost to two 6-6 teams. Ole Miss lost to I think 7-5 Florida on the road. By the way, okay, both of these teams' two losses actually came on the road, so I'm not going to say anything about that. But well, Alabama lost three games, but you know what I'm saying. So Ole Miss, let's talk about the losses. Okay, all three of Alabama. Okay, okay. Alabama's three losses on the road versus a great Tennessee team, on the road versus a terrible Vanderbilt team, even though it's great for Vanderbilt, still a terrible team overall. And then on the road against a terrible Oklahoma team, dominated, by the way, in that game. That has to be pointed out. Dominated by a terrible Oklahoma team. Recently, Ole Miss has lost at home by 3 or 7 points against a bad Kentucky team. That's their worst loss of the season. On the road, this is the one that hurts. On the road against a bad LSU team, but they won like 8 games, but it's a bad LSU team. They lost that game in overtime by like 3 points. Alabama did dominate that same LSU team in Death Valley. That is a common opponent. That doesn't look good for Ole Miss. Ole Miss went to the swamp in Florida, lost by like 7 points. Close game. Florida 7-win team. They're better than Oklahoma. They're better than Vanderbilt. But man, I just think Ole Miss is better than Alabama. I really do. I don't like this. I don't know, man. I think Oklahoma, but South Carolina even. This is South. You can't put South Carolina ahead of Ole Miss because Ole Miss went to South Carolina and dominated them like it wasn't even competitive. But South Carolina, they're red hot. They just beat Clemson, and this is the thing: they're above Clemson. So Clemson, if there weren't, this is the thing: that fifth automatic bid, it worked in this case because it prevented Alabama from getting in, right? But a three-loss Clemson still got in the playoffs. It's just, I just, I don't honestly, I really don't think 12 is necessary. I think 10 would be better. That's just my opinion. There are not 12 contenders in any given season. There's just not. Clemson is not good enough to win a national championship. I don't think Boise State or SMU are good enough to win a national championship. Like that's just my opinion. Why the hell was Penn State ranked at number 4? Okay, I gotta get off these. I gotta get off of these rankings before I crash out. Let's get back to let's get back to the college football playoff bracket here. Let's get back. Where did we leave off here? Okay. Clemson won the ACC championship game. They will be playing in oh, I forgot. Okay, so this first round is home game for the higher ranked team. That's very interesting to play the first, I think, maybe the first college football playoff game. That is very interesting. Texas obviously losing to Georgia again. Texas, I think, is going to be very motivated for this game. It's an interesting matchup. Clemson, Texas. I don't know how often they would have played in history, but yeah, I do. Even though Clemson has some momentum now, I do think Texas is going to be very motivated to win this game. They cannot allow themselves to lose to all three of the tough opponents that they play. That would be a massive reputation damager. So I think Texas comes out. I think they win this game. And honestly, I see a blowout. I think that Texas defense is legit. You look at what they did to Georgia's offense in both of the games they played. Clemson struggled in the second half against SMU. I do think Texas will shut them down and win this game by double digits. That's my prediction. So then we have Texas moving on to play Arizona State. Tennessee and Ohio State. Great game. Honestly, I think the best game of the first round right here. Tennessee in Columbus to play Ohio State. Wow, what a game. What do I think is going to happen here? Tennessee, they're not on a downhill like Ohio State is. Ohio State now has had a lot of time. They're going to have, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Ohio State's going to have 3 weeks to sit on that loss to Michigan. And who knows what their mind state is. Honestly, it could be anywhere. It is such an X factor for how motivated Ohio State will be this game. They could be the most motivated they've been all season, or they could be absolutely crushed and just ready to give up. I have no idea what version of Ohio State we'll see. However, I know for a fact that Ohio State is a much better roster than Tennessee. Tennessee's defense, this is the thing though. Tennessee is just a better version of Michigan in a way. Tennessee's defense is better than Michigan, and Michigan's defense shut down Ohio State. Tennessee's run game is better than Michigan, and Michigan ran all over Ohio State. Tennessee's pass game is miles and miles above Ohio's or Michigan's, I should say. And Michigan could not throw the ball against Ohio State. Tennessee will have more than 60 fucking passing yards against Ohio State. But here's the issue. Michigan's secondary, even without Will Johnson, was not weak. They made plays against Ohio. Tennessee's secondary is weak, in my opinion. If Ohio State gets their head out of their ass and they're willing to throw the ball, they should be able to throw the ball effectively against this Tennessee secondary if the O line can keep Will Howard upright and protected. And if Will Howard cannot make multiple dumb turnovers in this game, because he has now in both of their big games against Penn State and Michigan. This is a great game. It's a close game. Honestly, it's a toss up. I think Nico really struggles in big games. I just both quarterbacks, massive question marks. Both defenses are great. Yeah, man, it's so tough. Really so tough because the winner will play Oregon. Either a rematch for Ohio State or the first time for Tennessee. Great game. This area of the bracket is going to produce, I think, the best football games overall. I'm going to go Tennessee. I think Ohio State mentally is not in the right place. So I'm going to go Tennessee to win this game to move on. In Columbus, by the way, I didn't mention that Ohio State will have the home field advantage, but I think Tennessee comes in and wins the biggest win of the Josh Heupel era for Tennessee, even bigger than the Alabama wins because this is in the playoffs now. So yeah, Josh Heupel picks up the biggest win of his career, moves on, and plays Oregon in the Rose Bowl. Damn, what a game that would be. SMU and Penn State, man, how the hell does Penn State have no good wins besides fucking Illinois and host a playoff game? That is just ridiculous to me. Whatever, though. Penn State hosts SMU. SMU, I already said they got off to a terrible start in the ACC championship game against Clemson. In the second half, though, they were rolling. The offense, honestly, was unstoppable. Kevin Jennings, what a game he played. I don't know if I've ever seen a quarterback have that good of a game against that Clemson defense as Kevin Jennings, the true sophomore, did in that game. Penn State, on the other hand, they lost Oregon. However, their offense proved me wrong. That was the best game I think I've ever seen the Penn State offense play in a so-on-so big game, right? However, that was the worst defense I've ever seen Penn State play in a big game. And of course, as the trend continues, Penn State has never won a big game since I've been a college football fan. This is a big game, so that does the trend continue? Listen, if Penn State played their typical Penn State game, if their offense struggled and their defense played lights out against Oregon, honestly, I would pick them to win this game. However, due to the weaknesses I just saw from that Penn State defense, I'm going to pick SMU to win this game. I will never pick Penn State to win a big game on this channel until they do it. So I'm going to pick SMU to go into Happy Valley, beat Penn State, because listen, even though I just complimented their offense for looking the best ever has, Drew Aller still threw 2 picks. He still threw 2 interceptions, costly interceptions that lost him the game. So even when he looks good, he's still playing ass. It's funny. And listen, they ran for like 300 yards on Oregon. Okay, let's get that straight. Honestly, SMU, I don't know if they're gonna. I think SMU might play better than Oregon did against Penn State. I'm almost positive of it. Like Penn State just played their best offensive game I've ever seen in a big game. I don't think it's going to be able to replicate that back-to-back games. So I'm taking SMU here. Probably going to be a heavy underdog, especially on the road. But it's Penn State. They will not win big games ever. So I'm picking SMU to move on and play Boise State. What a game that would be. Former G5 teams playing the quarterfinals of the college football playoff. Well, current and former G5 teams. Next up, final round one game. Indiana on the road to play Notre Dame. A couple 11-1 teams here. Notre Dame hosting a college football playoff game. Wait, this is 12. This is the 20th. Are all the other games the 21st? Yes, they are. Interesting. So you have three games on the 21st, back to back to back. And then we have one solo game on the 20th here between Indiana and Notre Dame. That's interesting. Okay, so Indiana's sole loss came to Ohio State like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and Notre Dame's only loss came in week two against NIU. So Notre Dame is on a 10-game win streak. They're rolling. However, their defense just showed some major flaws in their final game against USC. Indiana, their final game, they stomped Purdue 66 to nothing. They fired their coach. So yeah, not really the same caliber of opponents, I'd say, in their final weeks. What do I like here in terms of matchups here? Indiana's offense has been the story of this team. Explosive pass game. Notre Dame's defense might be, no, I think it is the best they've played all season. Ohio State shut them down from a physicality perspective. They could not protect Curtis Rourke. They could not keep him upright, and the talent really shined through. Notre Dame, I don't think they'll be able to do that to him, but I do think Notre Dame's the better team, and they're at home. I'm going to have to take Notre Dame here. The question is, will Indiana be able to slow down the Notre Dame run game and force Riley Leonard to pass the ball? That's the question here. Because if they can, I think Riley Leonard will make mistakes and keep Indiana in the game. But we know what Notre Dame's going to do. They're going to run the ball and play great defense. If Indiana can force them to break out of that mold that they like to play in, then we got a game. But if that's not the case, yeah, I'm not sure that they can, really stand a chance here. So I got Notre Dame at home picking up the win and moving on. Let's start now from the same spot here. Notre Dame moves on and then plays Georgia in a neutral site at the Sugar Bowl. Very interesting game. This will be on January 1st here. So that means that I'm assuming Carson Beck will be healed from whatever weird little injury he picked up in the Texas game. So we have a healthy Georgia team, presumably playing a healthy, well, Notre Dame still missing Benjamin Morrison, but playing a relatively healthy Notre Dame team. Honestly, at times this season, these have been my number two and my number three teams in the country. Okay. This is a very, very interesting matchup here because Georgia, and specifically their offense, has started off slow in every single big game. Let's just run through the games where Georgia's offense got off to a slow start. The championship game against Texas, against Georgia Tech, against Tennessee, against Alabama, against Kentucky, against Texas the first time. I don't even know if they did it against Texas, but their offense was bad against Kentucky. So against Texas, I should say, the first game. So Georgia's offense has been a massive letdown this year, and they get off to slow starts. And Carson Beck has been turning it over. Okay. Notre Dame is a very good defense, but Georgia carved up Tennessee, who is also a very good defense. It really just depends on what version of Carson Beck we see. If Carson Beck comes to play, we know how good the Georgia defense has looked. I feel like if Carson Beck comes to play and the Georgia defense is on point, they're the national champions. That's my opinion. But if there's any room for error against Notre Dame, or if there is any mistakes, I should say, against Notre Dame, I like Notre Dame in that matchup. Um, and listen, Georgia is just more used to this environment. Just they've played 4 or 5 massive games already this season. They're 3-2 in those matchups. So Georgia's just used to this. Notre Dame, if they win against Indiana, that'll be their first playoff win in who knows how long. So I just don't feel confident, honestly, in Notre Dame in a big game environment against Georgia, who's been there, done that so much the past 4 or 5 years. Give me Georgia against Notre Dame. So Georgia advances to the college football playoff semifinals for me. Then we got SMU against Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. That'll be on New Year's Eve. Very interesting game. I would take SMU in that game. I think they're just the better team. If they beat Penn State, they'll be rolling at that point. Boise, with a month off, I just don't love it. Listen, Boise, they're a great story, right? But they have shown the last 2 months, really, they have just not looked dominant on either side of the ball. Their quarterback, he's fine. When Ashton Jeanty runs for 200 yards and they don't make mistakes, he plays okay. He doesn't turn it over, but he makes mistakes. Don't get me wrong. He threw a terrible pass in the UNLV game that should have been picked off, but it wasn't. The Boise State defense, it's played really good at times. Their D line, they're like second in the country in sacks, but they don't have the talent to match up with a team like SMU. And listen, This could be a really high scoring game. Okay. SMU shut down the Clemson run game. I don't know if they'd shut down Ashton Jeanty. I don't think he'd have 200 yards. I don't even know if he'd have 150 yards. Like they'd have to give him 40 touches, I think, against SMU for him to break 150. So I just don't think Boise State's going to be able to perform against SMU like they have against some of these other Mountain West teams. And they've struggled in a lot of these games against the Mountain West teams. So SMU, it's just another caliber, in my opinion. I think they're going to walk through Boise State fairly easily in that game. They'll move on to the college football playoff semifinals. Then we would have Oregon versus Tennessee in the Rose Bowl. Possibly, not definitely the best quarterfinal game out of anybody. Tennessee, it's just a really good game. I mean, Oregon versus Tennessee. I would have to pick Oregon. Honestly, Oregon, I just don't see anybody beating them. You look at how they looked against Ohio State and against Penn State, their offense looks unstoppable. And listen, their defense showed a lot of flaws in both of those games. Don't get me wrong. But I don't know if Tennessee necessarily is the team to exploit that. They could absolutely run for 200 plus yards against Oregon. We just saw Penn State do that. But I just don't trust Nico. When it comes down to it, as the games get tougher, Nico's too young. I don't think he's ready for that compared to the most experienced quarterback in college football history in Dylan Gabriel. I got to go with Oregon. They have just looked too good this season. I got them advancing to the college football playoff semifinals. Then up here we got Arizona State hosting Texas, a former Big 12 team and the current Big 12 champs. I got Texas in this game. You know, Arizona State, listen, great story, great season. Cam Skattebo is amazing. Their quarterback also is playing extremely well the last 6 or 7 games. He's playing great football. Their defense looked really good against Iowa State, but man, it's Texas, man. Come on. Texas is one of the most talented teams in the country. Their defense is amazing. They have so many weapons, and listen, Texas did not look great against Georgia, but you're telling me they got to beat Clemson and Arizona State to get to the college football playoff semifinals? Come on, man. Give me Texas. So then, that would mean we got Texas versus Oregon in the college football playoff semifinals. What a matchup that would be. Amazing matchup. I've just seen Texas offense struggle in both of the Georgia games, and it's just completely unreliable, in my opinion. They are all finesse, no physical. Georgia completely shut down their run game in both games. I feel like Oregon would do the same. I don't think Texas would be able to run for 150, 200 yards on Oregon. I feel like it would become a shootout. And listen, the Texas defense potentially slowing down the Oregon offense. I'd be willing to hear that out. I really would. But if they get past Tennessee or Ohio State, they got past Penn State already. Nobody's been able to slow them down all season. I just don't think Texas would be the team to do it, and I'm going to pick Oregon. I just am, in my opinion. I got Oregon beating Texas in a great game. I think it would be a 30-plus point on each side performance, but I got Oregon in the national championship game. Then we go down Georgia against SMU. Listen, shout out to SMU. It would be an absolutely amazing story if they beat Penn State and beat Boise State. But nobody on planet Earth would be picking SMU to beat Georgia. It's just not close. I mean, it's just, it's the unfortunate truth. And SMU, they would have earned their way here. They really would have. So Georgia, they really do have an easy path. Georgia has a really easy path to the national championship game because their hardest opponent would be Notre Dame and Penn State. That's just not that tough in my opinion. So Georgia got the easy side of the bracket. They would dominate SMU and they would advance to the national championship game between Georgia and Oregon, a rematch from 2 years ago, the opening game of the season, where Georgia throttled Oregon, dominated them. That would be a great storyline. How much has Oregon grown since that point? Oregon at this point would be what? 15-0. Georgia would be 13-2, I think. Man, what a game. What a game that would be. I do think Oregon, I'll say this, I don't think Georgia would squash them like they did 2 years ago. Oregon's got a lot better. Georgia's got a lot worse. But man, we got the teacher versus apprentice storyline as well. Former assistant Dan Lanning. former assistant at Georgia, now at Oregon. It's a lot. It's a lot revolving around this game, but man, I just feel like I'd have to go Georgia. We've just listen. We've seen what Georgia has done to everybody not named Alabama. Just think about all the teams that have failed to beat Georgia over the last 3 years, no matter how good they are. Tennessee 3 times, 0 for 3 against Georgia. Texas 2 times, 0 for 2 against Georgia. The National, they beat Michigan when they were a really good team. They beat Ohio State and with their best team in the last 3 years. So CJ Stroud, they beat who else they beat? They beat TCU, who beat Michigan. I mean, they even beat Alabama 3 years ago. So it's just Georgia against anybody not named Alabama. I'm going to pick Georgia. That's just how I feel. Oregon would be a great story. 15-0. They would have a really good chance to win that game. But the Georgia defense still was the story for me. When Georgia's defense comes to play, there's nothing that anybody can do. I mean, look, honestly, if you think about it this season, they have not played a full bad game, this Georgia defense. They had a terrible half against Alabama, but then they shut down Alabama in the second half. They played a pretty bad game against Ole Miss, but they turned 7 Ole Miss scoring drives into just 28 points. So honestly, Georgia's defense is still, I think if Georgia wins the national championship, it will be because this defense came through. But they also, don't get me wrong, they will need the Carson Vex, they will need his best 3 games in their potential 3 games it would take to win. So that's how I feel. I do have Georgia winning it all at this point in time. That obviously could change. But yeah, man, I'm happy with the rankings. I'm happy with the way things turned out. I think the right teams got in, and we are in for some truly special games this playoffs. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new. This should ended up turning into like I apologize for that. But I'll see y'all on the next one. Peace.